Google is now a pretty big company. We've got about 60,000 people employed. We produce an awful lot of stuff. Obviously, Google Search, Android operating system, YouTube, Chrome web browser, Gmail, self-driving cars, glass, balloons. I don't know what's going to be next. And what has all that stuff got in common? The thing they've got in common, and in some ways is core to Google's brand, is that they're all innovative technology products. They're cool new stuff. And I wanted to talk a bit about the core practice, the product strategy, the rigid process that we use in order to ensure that we can produce a steady stream of innovative technology, cool stuff, new projects. And this is the rigid process that we follow every day in all our work at Google. And I'd like to talk about that, but it's not really like that. This is what really happens within Google. The fact is that Google is the least process-driven of any large company that I know. It's actually quite remarkable how little process there is. Remarkable and sometimes a little bit scary about how little process there is. And that's partly because it really doesn't fit the DNA of the people who work there or the processes that we use within. Instead of having rigid processes, there's more a culture. There's a set of principles or values. There's an old phrase that culture eats strategy for breakfast. The idea that it doesn't matter what process you've got written down on paper. If people don't feel it in their heart, if they're not motivated by a set of core values or core culture, then no amount of forms or databases or processes are ever going to help you. So I'm going to talk briefly about 3 of the core values that go into Google's product development process. The first is focused on the user. Now, this is in some ways pretty obvious. I actually found this backstage in one of the dressing rooms. And the fact is, if a sentiment is expressed on a coat hanger, then it's probably not a great insight. Obviously, you need to focus on users. They're the people who are going to use and ultimately buy your products. You need to focus on the user through the various strategies, talk to your user. I spend a lot of time talking to users, finding data about their behavior and so on in order to produce a product which they love and which they will use. That's the shallow sense of the term focus on the user. However, particularly within Google and particularly within the digital realm, it's got a much deeper sense. And the deeper sense is that focus on adoption, monetization will follow. After all, that doesn't say focus on the money, even though, as a publicly quoted company, Google has to make money. Every business has to make money. But that doesn't say focus on the money, it says focus on the user. The reason is that within digital as a whole, and Google in particular, you can start off with focusing on the user and get that right, even if you're not sure where the monetization is going to come later on down the line. For example, Android. It's a free open source operating system. However, it takes a huge amount of money, a huge amount of resources to produce it. There are thousands, about thousands of engineers working on Android. There are hundreds of engineers working on Android in London, the floor below me. I know they're there, I can see them. And yet, it's distributed for free. Now, when we started producing, initially bought Android as a startup and then started pouring resources into further development of Android, it wasn't clear how we were going to make money out of it. What was clear is that the world needed new touchscreen-based phone operating systems. It wasn't clear how the monetization was going to come. Now, these days, because we're distributing it for free, Android is one of the top 2 most popular operating systems in the world, obviously, used on hundreds of millions, probably billions of devices. And yet Google doesn't make money from those directly. Anyone can put Android on a phone and not pay Google any money. Now, the fact is that these days, Google makes a lot of money, I don't know the actual numbers, from the Play Store. So if you've got an Android phone, the easiest and quickest way to get content and apps, to buy content and apps is via the Google Play Store, and that makes a great deal of money. But that wasn't built into the plan, that wasn't part of the great scheme initially. The idea was produce a great product, get large amounts of adoption, and then figure out how you can make money. Now, this pattern is repeated, perhaps the most interesting example of this strategy is Amazon. Now, Amazon is mostly known for the brown boxes, for e-commerce. However, it really doesn't make that much money, or rather doesn't make that much profit from the e-commerce arm. In fact, don't quote me on this, including on the live stream, don't quote me on this. I think in terms of international e-commerce, they're actually making a loss. So what are they doing? How does this work? Well, a few years ago, Jeff Bezos, the boss of Amazon, realized that they had this huge computing infrastructure required to support their e-commerce front end. Now, in the US in particular, but to a lesser extent around the world, there's a huge spike in retail between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So Amazon had to have sufficient computing capacity to support that spike, which meant they had a huge amount of computing capacity going idle for the rest of the year. Jeff Bezos had the brilliant idea of renting that computing power out. And he invented what is now known as the public cloud. And it's big. Most of the large online services that you know will now be running on one of the cloud services. Netflix, for example, runs mostly on Amazon Cloud. Snapchat, for example, runs mostly on Google Cloud. Google and Microsoft and other suppliers also provide their own cloud services. Jeff Bezos invented an entire new industry based on the back of the user adoption of e-commerce. The money turned out to be more in cloud than in e-commerce. A complete unexpected route. This development in which you can go from adoption first, monetization later, depends on two things. One is the scalability which digital gives you. What's the difference between a startup and any other business? You know, all businesses start up. A new hairdresser starts up, but it's not strictly speaking a startup, because a startup depends on having some kind of scalable growth phase. If you open one hairdresser, great, you can make a business. Opening the second hairdresser doesn't really give you much advantage. You can only sell so many seat hours. You can only sell so many haircuts. However, the scale and the network effects that are available via digital distribution mean that you can expand massively. For example, a social network, the amount of software development required to produce the first user on, say, Facebook or some other social network is not that much dramatically different than that required to serve 100 million customers. So digital supports the ability to grow through adoption without monetization. And secondly, the growth of venture capital firms, particularly in Silicon Valley, who understand this business model. And in some ways, they're even more crucial than the first bit. We're starting to see the growth of venture capital firms who understand that model in the UK, but that has been a key element of the success of Silicon Valley. Secondly, what's the 10x? This, apparently, is Larry Page's favorite question. It's the question he asks when judging whether Google should invest in a new product. Contrary to rumor, we don't just say yes to everything. You need to actually convince the bill payers to actually build stuff. Compare it to another useful phrase used to spark and to talk about innovation, of thinking outside the box. Thinking outside the box is apparently the UK's 10th least favourite phrase. And I know that's true because I read it in the Daily Mail. Why is it such an unpopular phrase? Because it just tends to generate stupid ideas that aren't of any use to anyone. Compare it to what's the 10x. When judging a product, you're asking, well, in what way is it 10x better? This has three crucial advantages over the question of thinking outside the box. The first is that it's concrete and focused on the user. When you say, what's the 10x, you're asking, for that particular product, in what way is it better? And what way is it better for the user? Is it 10 times faster? Is it 10 times lighter? Is it 10 times bigger? Is it 10 times cheaper? Is it 10 times bigger? In what way is it 10 times better that matters for the user? It is concrete. It then forces you to say, well, suppose we could build something that was 10 times faster, bigger, whatever it is, then work backwards from that to say, well, how would we get there? It forces you to not start from the technology, but from the attributes of the thing you're trying to build, and then work out how to build it. Secondly, there's something about the 10. What's the 2x doesn't have the same impact. To get a 2x, you can normally get that just by tweaking the current product. Fine-tune here, add a bit there, and so on. What's the 100x, what's the 1000x, also doesn't have the same impact because that just tends to lead to kind of science fiction answers. Suppose we had a magic thing that could solve all this. 10x seems to be, time and time again, just about the right amount of innovation, that it is just about conceivable if you can figure out radical ways of doing it that force you to rethink basic assumptions. So it's not 2x or 100x. Also, we're just looking for one 10x. It doesn't have to be better in every respect. For example, Android, when it first came out, wasn't the best phone operating system in the world. However, it was free. It was at least 10x better in another way. Google Search, there were search engines around before Google Search, but Google Search indexed at least 10 times more sites. It's also very useful to, this is, of all the attributes I'm talking about here, this is perhaps the one with the greatest applicability outside large technology firms. If you are producing a good or service or providing a service, a consultancy, whatever it is, a very useful thought exercise to go through is to think, how could I charge 10 times more for what I'm doing? What would I have to do in order to be able to charge 10x? What would the customer want? What would the customer need? What kind of value would they get? It's a useful thought exercise to go through. So, what's the 10x? Third one, launch and iterate. The distinguishing feature of innovative technology products is that they're new and innovative technology. In other words, you don't really know what you're doing. If you're producing other soap powder, you've probably produced a soap powder before. You know how to make soap powders. Sure, you can fine-tune your soap powder. I know there's probably some chemists in the audience who understand this process much better than I, but you can produce a better soap powder. If, however, you're producing something which is genuinely innovative, you've probably never done that before. There'll be a huge amount you don't know. Therefore, produce an early version as soon as possible, if only purely as a learning exercise. Because going through the process of producing an early version forces you to solve lots and lots of problems and to come across the problems you didn't even know exist. And because it's a new area, you're going to have to go through that process in order to produce a successful product. The second reason why launch and iterate is important is that the other aspect of innovative technology products is that they're high risk. In other words, lots will fail. Now, if you want to rationally invest, deciding whether to invest time, resources, your own time, your own resources in a product, you want to know as soon as possible whether it's viable or not. Investing huge amounts of resources up front till you've got the product beautifully polished with every single feature there, everything is absolutely perfect, means that you've probably spent too much money on it. If things don't break, you've probably waited too long to launch. This also means that if there are big, hairy technical questions, you should front-load the technical risk. Confront the big technical question and get that out there first. If you combine these lessons together, the focus on the user in order to get mass adoption, the looking for a 10x, some key attribute in which the product is a lot better, and the launch and iterate, you get the idea of the minimum viable product. The idea that figure out what is the minimum product you can launch into the market as soon as possible that delivered some benefit to the user. Now, it can still have massive limitations, but that's okay, because what matters is that one crucial improvement. You have to prove that you can do that. For example, Google Docs, you know, the word processor in a browser, or spreadsheet in a browser. I don't know if you use it or not. I don't remember if you remember when it first came out. And it really wasn't that good. There are an awful lot of features missing. Compared to, you know, the established desktop products from Microsoft and Apple, really there was not a lot to it. It almost seemed like a toy. Who would ever want that? However, it had one crucial advantage, maybe two, which was that because it was based within the browser, not based on a file sat on your desktop or laptop, it meant that, A, you could share it, different people could work on it at the same time, and there was none of that pain of the versioning. Oh, which version of the file did you update? No, I saved it in that place. Oh, no, that was the wrong one. You got to take the change from there to there. That pain. I don't know if you remember that pain. That pain was horrible. Google Docs was not perfect, but it solved that pain. That was technically one of the biggest pains to solve, providing that basic functionality in the context of a browser backed by cloud. But perhaps my favorite example of a minimum viable product is the Chrome web browser, now the most popular web browser in the world. When I first joined Google, one of my first sessions was taught by one of the first engineers on Chrome, and she told me about the first version of Chrome. Now, Chrome as a browser initially had two key user benefits. The first was that it would auto-update, and the second was that it was incredibly fast. Fast is always good. Well, just about. It's a fairly safe assumption that fast is always good. The auto-update one was also very, very interesting because, again, I don't know if you remember the pain of normal browsers. Every so often there'd be some kind of security vulnerability and you had to download a new version and close your old one and reinstall the new version. And if you didn't keep everything up to date, there'd be hell to pay. You know, particularly if you're in a large organization and trying to protect the IT infrastructure of a large organization, browser vulnerabilities were a major headache. You know, we've got a lot better these days, but in the early days of the web, it was a wild west, and people got seriously hurt. The fact of just that basic thing of installing security vulnerabilities automatically so that you didn't have to do anything was a big win. So the first version of Chrome wasn't even a browser. It was just a box. It was just a window with nothing in it, not even a button. They launched it just to the first few engineers working on the Chrome team. But that box had a secret. It had an auto-update mechanism. So you would have your browser, and then they figured out how to make it render a web page. And using the auto-update mechanism, they could launch that functionality to the 20, 30 people, 20, 30 engineers working on the team. And bing, suddenly it was a browser just about. Then they worked out how to do a back button. And the next version rolled out, and hey, we've got a back button now. And after a while, it was good enough that they could actually dog food it, in other words, use it with other people inside the organization. There's a phrase of dog fooding, the idea that you should eat your own dog food. If you're producing a product, you'd better use it. So after a while, it was good enough to be dog fooded, and after a while, it was good enough to be launched, and it's now, and that grey box, that was literally just a grey box, is now the most popular web browser in the world. These lessons focus on the user for adoption, 10x, and launch and iterate are easy to see. And we see it nodding, yes, that makes sense, that makes sense. It turns out it requires an awful lot of discipline in practice. It is hard. As a product manager, I confront these issues every single day. It means because you're looking for a 10x, because you're looking for this kind of crucial differentiation, it means you're always working on problems that are outside your comfort zone. If they're inside your comfort zone, you probably shouldn't be working on that because that's a solved problem. You need to be concentrating on the stuff which is different and hard. It means that stuff gets cancelled. Didn't work out? Pfft, sorry, that thing that you devoted the last years of your life to didn't work out. But that's okay, because whatever you come up with next will be great. You spend all your time dealing with the feedback, the nasty feedback. You can't just say, oh no, the user will be all right. You've actually got to understand what the user is doing every single day of the week, getting as much data and understanding about them as possible, and truly trying to face up to their problems. It's hard work and sleepless nights. At Google, it's not all free sushi and nap pods. Yes, we do have free sushi, and we do have nap pods, but that's not what gets the product out the door. It's an enormous amount of hard work facing up to the implications of those three simple but basic principles. It's an awful lot of hard work, and I hope you enjoy using the results. That's me. Thank you.